Imagine for a moment, if you will, a world, one in which all crime is legal, anything from petty theft to murder. Now imagine a movie that asks the question, what are the implications, the ramifications of such a world? Well, TLDR 2013's The Purge answers that question with, man, that would suck. The Purge is a 2013 horror movie about a wealthy family that gets targeted by a murderous mob after they harbor someone that the mob is going after. This all takes place during The Purge, which is a 12-hour event in which all crime is legal. If you haven't seen The Purge and you care about spoilers, here's your warning. I'm going to summarize the movie and then get into my thoughts on it. So to start off with, we're treated to some gruesome security cam footage of previous purges to get us into that holiday spirit. Kind of like a twisted version of those Christmas movie marathons that start like mid-October for some reason. And the story starts, we're introduced to James Sandin, who's on his way home after a long day of exploiting a system that eliminates homelessness by literally eliminating the homeless.
You're number one, Mr. Sandin. You got it, sir. Came out on top.
But don't worry, I don't actually have to think for myself to come to that conclusion because the movie lays it all out for you in the first 4 minutes.
The poor can't afford to protect themselves. They're the victims tonight.
We all got our own opinions. That's what makes this country great. Holly, line 4, what are your purge plans?
Locking down behind my brand new security system.
Mr. Sandin gets home and we meet Mrs. Sandin, their daughter Zoe, and this guy Henry, who doesn't really add anything to the story in my opinion. I mean, he does one single thing to progress the plot, and then he just immediately dies when his use is run out. And it really only feels like he's there just to give the daughter something to do. Then we meet the neighbors who right off the bat, I can't tell if they're being foreshadowed to be villains later on, or if all rich suburbanites are just that off-putting.
Ooh, cookies. I hope you're hungry. Those cookies are crazy good.
You're lovely.
And then at this point, we're introduced to the son, who, despite being a little weird, seems to be the only one going in with a conscience.
What is it? What's bothering you? It's tonight, isn't it?
Hey, what's bothering you? Is it the murder? Is it all the murder? Does all the murder bother you? Are you bothered? You little weirdo, are you bothered by murder?
Guys, look what time it is.
Well, it's later than I thought.
And now it's purge time. Mr. Sandin waits until the last minute to start the lockdown, despite the dangers like someone breaking in before the purge, which we find out later is exactly what happens.
I snuck in when you were eating.
But before we get to that, we gotta get the ground rules out of the way. Basically, all crime is legal, up to and especially murder. However, some higher level politicians, you know, like the guys that started this whole thing in the first place, are given immunity, meaning you can't do anything to them. It's kind of like when you were a kid outside playing tag at recess, and you know, you're having a good time with your friends, but then there's that one kid that is always like, oh, the swing set is the safe zone, but they're at the swing set, so it just feels like they don't want the rules to apply to them. So it's exactly like that. So now that we're fully into the holiday spirit, the son, Charlie, sees a man being hunted outside, and out of concern for the man, Charlie lets him in despite the danger. Things get tense, but Henry decides to break the ice with a little bit of attempted murder, but Mr. Sandin ends up pulling an Uno reverse card, and like I said before, Henry never really comes up again, and it's like he was never really there. The guy that Charlie let inside gets away and hides somewhere in the house.
Where is he? Huh? Where's the man?
And the festivities are interrupted by the Young Republican Club trying to hunt him down. Now, the bad guys in this movie aren't really given a name as a group, and if you look up the cast, the leader is only listed as Polite Leader. Maybe I have a different definition of polite.
Tell me, why haven't you delivered the filthy swine to me yet?
But for the purposes of this review, I'm going to refer to them as the Young Republicans because, look at them.
Your home tells me you're good folk, just like us. One of the halves. And your blue flowers tell me that you support the purge.
The Young Republicans give the Sandins until their battering ram comes to give up the stranger, or else they'll break in and kill them all.
If you don't deliver him by the aforementioned time, we'll release the beast on him. And on you.
Turns out the security systems that gave the Sandins their fortune aren't entirely effective.
Is it impenetrable? No.
So they have a choice to make. Are they going to give up an innocent man, or will they stand up for what's right?
Okay, so here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna give them what they want.
Wow, okay, that was quick. The next chunk of the movie is spent by the Sandins looking for the stranger, and by the Young Republicans inexplicably just wasting their purge night. Charlie tries to help the guy out with Timmy, his unsettling teched-out RC car. Charlie guides the stranger to his hiding spot, but then Zoe decides to be a copycat and goes there too.
I'm going to go hide in your secret spot.
Which results in a standoff between Mr. Sandin and the stranger. The Sandins overpower the stranger, tie him up, and do some casual torture to shut him up since he's being really unreasonable, not wanting to die.
We're making this much more difficult than it used to be.
Zoe tells her dad what he's doing is kind of fucked up.
Look, at what you're doing.
And once the stranger volunteers to sacrifice himself for the Sandins, Mr. Sandin, being ever the contrarian, decides they'll fight off the young Republicans.
We're gonna fight.
Mr. Polite Leader over here has a heated gamer moment and tells his crew to release the beast, so now we're in full action mode. After killing one of the young Republicans, Mr. Sandin gets jump scared by their ringleader. And then, when all hope seems lost, the neighbors come back and squad wipe the young Republicans. And then, when all hope seems found, the neighbors reveal they're actually there to squad wipe the Sandins.
You made so much money off of us, and then you just stuck it in our faces.
And then, when all hope seems lost, again, the stranger comes back and squad wipes the neighbors. And with all the leverage on her side, Mrs. Sandin decides not to kill her neighbors. No, they deserve a fate worse than death. Small talk.
Did you enjoy Grace's purge party?
With the purge over and the danger gone, Mrs. Sandin lets the stranger stay at her house, get cleaned up. She even offers to use her family's connections to get the man a nice, well-paying job. Nah, just kidding. He walks out and she just lets him go, despite knowing he will die in the next purge. Now, what's so bad about the movie? Why do I think it has wasted potential? I mean, the performances are good, the dialogue is solid, the cinematography is fine. My issue lies more with the premise and the plot itself, more than any of the technical aspects. First of all, if you're judging just based on this movie alone, which there are a lot of sequels, and there's a TV show on Hulu which goes deeper into it and explains more about the lore and the world, but for the purposes of this review, I just want to go over what's presented in this movie because that seems the most fair. It's the first one that came out, and you shouldn't have to rely on future material for this one to make sense. So one of the most obvious criticisms that I have is that the premise really relies on everyone desperately wanting to just murder, or even really being capable of murder. Like, the movie presents it as like an outlet for aggression, and you know, the reason there's no crime outside of the purge is that everyone just lets it out during this one night. Now, putting aside the whole idea of one night a year being enough to let out all of that aggression, and that not being how it works. What did you say to me? Huh? Are you trying to start a fight, kid? Oh, I'm gonna get you. I'm gonna kick your ass. I'm gonna murder you in 4 months, 28 days, and 3.5 hours. There are other outlets for aggression, like MMA, legal year-round. Another thing I thought of is that militias would form as a sort of pseudo law enforcement, you know, like Proud Boy types would go out into the streets and enforce their ideas of decency, you know, stuff that happens. And so during a night like the Purge, that would effectively turn into a lynch mob, an unstoppable, legally unstoppable lynch mob. And it's sort of glossed over in this movie, but there are some restrictions during the Purge. But outside of the higher level politicians being given immunity, which can be enforced with just a bunker, there's no real way to enforce any other regulations beyond just the honor system. Personally, if I was writing this movie and fleshing out the premise, I would have the focus be more on stuff like vandalism, you know, stuff that's less drastic than murder. So then when murder does happen, it has more weight to it. Because if you expect murder, then it happens. I mean, yeah, it happens. You know, it's like going to a NASCAR event and then being surprised when people crash. Or it's like going to a football game and being surprised when someone gets tackled. But if their family just expects their house to get TP'd and then someone dies, that has a whole lot more weight and meaning behind it. Now, moving beyond the premise, I want to get more into the story. I don't like the protagonists, I don't like the antagonists, and at the end of the day, it doesn't really feel like this movie has a lot to say. Personally, I don't even think this particular story needs to be told in the Purge universe. There's nothing about the story itself that necessitates it taking place during a night of lawlessness. It only really feels like they wanted an interesting enough premise to just get people into theaters. If you remove the novelty of the premise, it's just a basic people breaking into a house horror story with nothing special about it. My issue with the protagonists is it feels like the movie can't decide whether or not we're supposed to like them or root for them at all. Obviously, the movie starts by introducing us to James Sandin, and then we follow the family throughout the rest of the story. But then when it gets to them hunting down and torturing a homeless veteran just so they can hand him off to a group of murderous bourgeois psychopaths, it gets a little hard to root for them. And by the way, without intervention, James was definitely about to kill that man. But then he decides not to, so I guess that makes him the hero again. And it's like, good job. You chose not to murder. Good for you. My issue with the antagonists is that one of them isn't threatening and the other just comes out of nowhere. The Young Republicans do nothing for the plot, message, or characterization, outside of just giving the good guys a mustache-twirling bad guy to be scared of. Then the neighbors show up and take them all out in like 8 seconds, showing they weren't really much of a threat to begin with. And these issues contribute to my biggest problem with the movie. It doesn't feel like it has a message. I mean, sure, some people say stuff in the background like the purge being unfair to the poor and the homeless.
Purge detractors often postulate this evening is actually about the elimination of the poor, the needy, the sick.
But that's the extent of it. The purge itself, the event in the movie, isn't utilized to say anything beyond, boy, it sure would be scary if crime was legal. Sure, you can just say it's a dumb horror movie and it's not that deep. But if you want a dumb horror movie, there's a plethora of options out there. I just think it's disappointing that a premise this interesting is being wasted on a movie where the theme boils down to, we live in a society. Now, complaining without offering a solution isn't very helpful. So what would I do? Keep in mind, I'm not a screenwriter and I've never paid Aaron Sorkin to tell me how to take his job, so I'm a little bit out of my depth and, of course, take everything I say with a grain of salt, but I have some broad changes that, in my opinion, would make the story a lot more compelling and meaningful. First of all, I would make the protagonist the stranger that Charlie lets inside, who in the sequels is named Dante Bishop, and that's what I'll refer to him as. As it is, Dante is more of a plot device and an object that gets used by the Sandins and then thrown out when he's not useful anymore. I think it would be a lot more compelling to see the night from his perspective as he thinks he's being saved by the Sandins, but then they ultimately betray him just to appease the mob outside and save their own lives. We could still have a few scenes developing the Sandins as characters, like when Charlie asks his parents why they don't go out to purge. I actually really like the idea of Charlie being anti-purge and being the one that lets Dante in. I think it makes the family more interesting. But I think the parents' explanation should be changed a bit to fit my vision for the story. In the movie, James says they don't go out just because they don't need to, but it gives other people a release for their pent-up aggression. Now, in real life, people think that being poor is a moral failure and it's because you bought too much Starbucks or something. And a similar attitude could be reflected in the parents. Since the poor can't afford to protect themselves during the purge, they're necessarily going to be involved in it more directly, whether it's defending themselves or even going out. But they don't have a choice in whether or not they want to be involved in it. The Sandins can just hide behind their security system and, reinforce doors, but a lot of other people don't have that option because they can't afford it. But people like the Sandins exist in a bubble where they just think that the poor are more violent because they're the majority of the people out on the streets. And by the way, if the Sandins aren't the protagonists, then as a writer, you don't have to work as hard to turn these people that tortured a homeless veteran into the heroes. I don't think the Young Republicans were effective as villains for the reasons I talked about earlier, but I do think they could be useful in my version of the story. Obviously, they need to be there so the Sandins have someone to betray Dante to, so I wouldn't cut them. They can represent the evil rich people that make the nice rich people look not so bad in comparison. And that actually leads pretty well into my idea for the movie's overall theme and message. My choices for the hero, the villain, and the people that betray the hero all perfectly convey the message that just because one rich person or family doesn't seem as bad as another one, that doesn't necessarily mean that they have your best interest at heart. Obviously, that applies to Dante, the Young Republicans, and the Sandins, but it's also an important message now, because everyone knows that Jeff Bezos is an evil man with a terrible heart that only cares about himself. The same people that think that, a lot of them, are Elon Musk stans. And just because Elon Musk says funny Twitter memes and dresses as Wario, that doesn't mean that he's one of us. He's still going to do the same things that Jeff Bezos does, except he's cultivated this cult of personality around himself where weirdos online will defend him no matter what. Now, that may seem like just a specific example cherry-picked from today's news, but there have always been James Sandins out there. These upper-class people that take part in and take advantage of a system that preys on the poor and impoverished while perpetuating poverty. And at the end of the day, it's important to be critical of systems like the purge or even capitalism. These systems that have been in place for a long time, so no one really questions them. And if you do question them, you're looked at like you're weird. Now, that's not the version of The Purge we got, and Hollywood won't answer my call, so we won't be getting it for a while. But if you want to watch something that actually does something interesting with the premise, I can't say anything about the sequels because I haven't seen them, but I have seen a couple episodes of the series on Hulu, which, by the way, is written by the same guy that wrote all the movies. And from what I've seen so far, it's a lot better, and it does a lot of interesting things with it. One thing that I like is that it shows Purge Night from multiple perspectives, not just that of one rich white family. By the way, quick little addition while I'm editing. I feel like this review went a little hard on the original movie, and I want to say that there is a lot of merit to the ideas expressed in the original movie, like, you know, how far will you go to save your own family, stuff like that. And I just want to, you know, clarify, I have a different vision for what a movie set in the Purge universe could be. I just feel like, you know, how far will you go to save your family isn't as interesting of a Purge story as something that deals more with what are the implications of the system. If you like this video, subscribe because I might just make more. I have a podcast because of course I do.
Oh, when I saw, okay, I need to mention this. Remember when Harley Quinn, like snaps that guy's neck with her thighs?
Yeah.
That's an instance where thick thighs, in fact, saved lives.
Well, it ended that person's life, but saved her own and many other people's.
In the event that she didn't actually
thick thighs
get out,
have a very complicated effect on the lives around them.
Yes, I would agree with that.
So go check that out and, you know, like, subscribe, all that stuff. Leave a comment if you agree or disagree. Tell me what your thoughts are. If you liked the video, tell me. If you didn't, keep it to yourself.